Hey guys, what's going on? Grumpy Uncle Pat here. And today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, addictions and recovery, and also pornography and sexual stuff, because they're very closely linked. And something to consider is the fact that there was this guy, there is a guy, his name is Gabor Mate. He's from the Vancouver area. He's a Canadian trauma specialist and addiction specialist. He wrote a book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And in this book, he basically, and I thought it was a bold claim when I first read it, he said that, like, working with people that were like hardcore homeless addicts in Vancouver's East Hastings area, where he encountered these people and was doing the work with them, that 100% of them, which is, I thought it was a bold number, but that's what he put in there, were victims of childhood sexual interference. And this is a very interesting thing, because we see it as an epidemic in Canadian Indigenous communities all across the world. We're seeing like epidemics of childhood interference that are going unresolved, and then these people without proper skill sets are turning around and self-medicating their pain, or continuing the cycle of abuse perpetration, because they never learn the skill set that it takes to heal from these traumas. But they are actually victims of a twisted morality that's given to them based off of basically a culture that's being propagated that's a sheer materialist level of sexuality, right? So if we want to consider the fact that we got all these people that are trying to self-medicate because they've been injured when they're young, and they've been maybe interfered with one way or another, and then they seek out something to make themselves feel better. Now there's a problem when the thing that makes people feel better are the exact things that damage them in the first place. So my example was, like, I was interfered with when I was like 4 or 5 years old with an adult showing me very inappropriate content in the form of pornography. And not an adult, a teenager. And this teenager had gotten it because it was part of his father's collection. And his father, who knows where he learned this stuff, but it was accessible, right? And this is way back when it was only VHS. Well, nowadays, young people can access this by a press of a button on a smartphone. As easily as you're watching my video now, these young people can access adult information or adult content. And we've got a political climate that says it's normal and it's healthy, and sex work is a viable opportunity for young women seeking employment, and the people that partake in it are, they're just expressing their freedom, and they're expressing their genuine, sexual liberation. But they don't pay attention to, like, it's really dopamine addiction. It legitimately is a dopamine addiction, and a dopamine is the chemical that gets released in anticipatory pleasure. So if you're thinking you're going to get a burger, you're thinking that you're going to get sex, you're thinking that you're going to have a wonderful experience, that feeling is the dopamine release. And dopamine is the major thing that causes us to get high from cocaine, sugar, salt, fat, any of these things. When you're like, oh my God, I get to do the thing, that's a dopamine hit. So technically, we're actually addicted to the dopamine, and that gets released when we're involved in these things. Now, if you're a young person, like a really young person, and maybe you've been exposed to this content, you're going to grow up your entire life being exposed at that age for the first time to sexuality. Now, a normal, maybe healthy sexual relationship or sexual understanding would develop into your adolescence. Let's say 15 years old is when you start wondering and start experimenting. But the problem is, if you get exposed to this stuff at a very, very young age, by the time you're 15, you've had 10 years, 13 years of exposure to sexual content being in your head. Where are you going to be when you're 20? And it's not a healthy expression of sexual relationships. Pornography is a twisted expression of sexual relationships. It's a twisted representation of compassion, of intimacy, of relationship between two individuals. Because largely it is made by profit mongers to appeal to your lowest desires. They go for the taboo, they go for the extreme. And when people become inundated, I forget the word for it, but there is a word, that when you become numb to the stimulus, you seek increasingly larger doses for the same effect. So an individual, let's say, that uses a bit of alcohol, beer eventually isn't going to do it for you, so you move up to harder alcohol. And once you're into harder alcohol, that's not going to do it for you, so you move into increased quantities or more increased drinking, more increased usage. The problem is, this is also attributed to drugs or anything else you use, from hamburgers and fast food or junk food to also pornography. So a young person, maybe that's interfered with, or just anybody who's exposed to this content at an inappropriate age will soon become numb to standard healthy sexuality. They will begin seeking increasingly harder levels of stimulation, where we get to a generation that is being raised on adult hypersexual content in mainstream media. We're talking music videos, popular music on the radio, songs like Cardi B or Nicki Minaj or 3-6 Mafia, some of like really kind of like unhealthy attitudes towards relationships and sex. And then you've got the attitude where you need harder and harder stimulus in order to appeal or to affect you in the same way. And then you move on to, well, that needs to be a bit more degrading in order to click the same buttons, to where we are now with the popular culture on these websites that I don't want to mention, because they're going to show you the increasingly depraved level of taboos in order to get the same dopamine hit that you would have if, when you were young, just vanilla, normal intercourse relationships. But ideally, you should be doing it instead of watching it. You should be participating in this exploratory, magical thing, as opposed to participating in a weird ritual, superficial ritual of degeneration. So this is hugely problematic for me, and I think it's problematic for society, because eventually we're going to have to dismantle a lot of damage. So yeah, we're going to have to dismantle a lot of damage if it's not too far gone. Because a lot of the damage that this content does and like these addictions are going to do to people can be, if they aren't willing to do the work, irreparable. They will do damage that we can't repair. Or what's actually going on with young people will go to the point where their behavior and addictions and their desire to get their fix goes so far that they start injuring each other. And yeah, I know this tends to be a bit of a downer, but it's stuff we need to be talking about in like frank discussions with each other and with young people. Because if we don't get on top of it, it's going to get on top of us, and the repercussions of this stuff become horrible. I'm going to close off with maybe a scary and maybe a little bit of a depressing video here from the serial killer Ted Bundy on pornography. And I want you to consider this when you're talking with your kids or if you're a young person getting into this stuff, because the consequences of the addiction and of the fixation on this content, it's not going to do anybody any good. All right, peace out. Take care of yourself, please.
I really feel that hardcore pornography and the doorway to it, softcore pornography, is doing untold damage to other people and causing other women to be abused and killed the way you did others.
Listen, I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. I mean, I don't pretend that I know what John Q. Citizen thinks about this. But I've lived in prison for a long time now, and I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography. There's no question about it. The FBI's own study on serial homicide shows that the most common interest among serial killers is pornography.
That's true.
And it's real. It's true.